Thank you for tuning in to Love in Your Hands with Cynthia Clark, soulmate palmist, spiritual teacher, love coach, author, and speaker. We are sharing stories of love and connection and lessons learned along the way. This podcast is sponsored by loveinyourhands.com, the place to ignite soulmate love fast using an innovative system to help you end loneliness and toxic relationships and elevate your vibrational energy to soulmate love and deeply compatible partners. Get started for free at loveinyourhands.com. And now here's your host, Cynthia Clark.
Hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Cynthia Clark, and I am excited to bring in a very special guest for our show today. Her name is Sarah Kennedy. And I can't wait to learn all about her. She is, I've taken a very quick look at her hands, but I'm going to be sharing her hands with everybody on the show today. So we are going to learn all about who she is. So welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much. I am extremely excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you and where you're at and what's going on with you.
Well, how real do you want me to be?
As much as you want to share is fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I turn 40 in about 2 weeks. And I have been kind of leading up to, or in the middle of what most people would probably consider to be a midlife crisis. But really for me, it's just like really getting to know myself and learning about what parts of my life are not necessarily fitting in with, I'm kind of at a crossroads because I'm finding out that everything that I've worked for and really been able to achieve is not necessarily what I want in life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I've never had my palms read before. I've never had anyone look at my hands. And I have quite a few questions or just curiosities. I'm very curious to see how what you have to say aligns with what I have been feeling right now, which is that big changes have been happening, but even bigger changes are on the horizon. So.
Yeah, well, definitely 40 is a big turning point in one's life. So yeah, I remember when I was that age, that was getting towards the end of my marriage, my first marriage, and all kinds of stuff was going on at that time. So yeah, it's a bit scary when you start entering in, what we would call the middle age, I guess.
Sure. Well, and honestly, I'm not the number. I've always known that I would be excited to be 40. I didn't know why, but everybody else is like, oh, it's midlife, everything downhill from here. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm just getting really in my groove and starting to realize who I am. And right now I'm really just, I know that I have a lot to offer as far as like the collective, but I just don't know what direction to take it. I have a lot of different skills that I have acquired and lots of knowledge. I have a podcast that I have somewhat abandoned, but I'm getting ready to rekindle. And I call myself the multifaceted maven because I just have a lot. So I'm trying to narrow it down at this point.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, let's dive into your hands and see what we find. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. So for everybody who is watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this as well. And if you are just listening, that's okay too, because I'm going to describe everything so that you can get the information. And it's about the messages that come in from your hands and what love wants to exude from your hands. So you do have some beautiful hands, by the way. I took some measurements. The first thing I like to determine is what is your archetype. And so your hand shape forms by the time you're about 6 years old, and it does not change from that point on. So it represents your personality, subconscious influences. And you have what we would call a water hand. Okay, you've got long fingers, you've got a rectangular palm. This is, it's so funny, you call yourself the multifaceted maven. It's like, wow, what a perfect name for a watery person, water-handed person, because that is the most adaptable hand shape that you have.
Oh,
so
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, so people with water hands, they tend to be very indecisive as to what they should go into, because honestly, they can go into just about anything.
Yeah.
And they do, they actually do really well either way. So that's the good news. Oh, that's not your hand. Let's go back this way. I've got both your hands here. Okay, so the next thing I like to look at is what we call your strong finger. And you definitely have a dominant, what we call the Jupiter finger or index finger. Okay, this is, we can tell this because of the length of it versus the ring finger. Okay, so your strong finger is going to show energy that is a strength for you, that's a natural strength for you. Okay, so you're bringing in qualities of Jupiter, which is leadership, ideals, bigger vision, somebody who needs some independence. You know, all of these things come from Jupiter. Respect. You know, when you think about Jupiter, he's like the king of the gods. So the king of the fingers. Okay. Yeah. So this combination with water gives us the archetype known as the butterfly. Okay, so the butterfly, your relationship genius, what you bring to the table is the value of impermanence. So in other words, you help people to let go of what it is that they no longer need, and you help to bring in the new for them. Okay, so anybody who comes into contact with you, this could be an intimate relationship, but also it goes across the board into all relationships. Your natural energy is to help others let go. Okay, so if there's something that they're just like stuck with, they're just not seeing what they're stuck with. You're like the garbage collector. It's like, okay, here's your garbage, and let's get rid of it. Let's take it out.
Yes.
And you do this particularly well in the realm of emotions, because water element is tied in with the emotional realm. So people who have stuck emotions in their system, or they're just consistently in these, I would call them the negative emotions, although all emotions really are neutral. We just have to learn to, we want to bring in more of what we consider the positive emotions.
Sure.
And let go of what we consider the negative emotions. So letting go of fear, letting go of frustration, letting go of angst, insecurity, things like that. You have a natural affinity to assist people with. So do you recognize this in yourself?
Definitely. With friendships of mine, or really relationships throughout my life, I tend to be the friend who, for lack of a better word, kind of points out. If I have a couple of friends in particular that I'm thinking of right now that have been coming to me with the same stories and patterns of their lives for years, that I've been like kind of helping them work through and recognizing, this is where you're at right now. This is where we were before, at this exact same situation, different people, different faces. You have the power to make this choice. And so there's a lot of that, but also just kind of recognizing their emotions, and I'm pretty empathic, so that probably plays into that as well, I'm guessing.
It does. And your empathic ability actually shows up when we start to look at some of the lines in your hand. Okay. You've got this this configuration here above your heart line. It's called a Girdle of Venus, which is a sort of like a half moon that comes underneath the middle finger and the ring finger. And this brings in extra sensitivity. Okay, so yeah, this is where your empathic abilities can come in. Also that just your water is naturally empathic as well. So you're kind of getting it from a couple of different angles. But yeah, that marker definitely is showing up. So it's important for you though, as an empath, that you make sure that you don't hang on to the garbage that people are dumping on your doorstep.
Yes.
So, because they're going to, they're going to try and give it to you.
Trying to give it to me. And I used to take it. I used to be like, oh, sure, I'll hold this for you. But it gets so heavy. I already have my own garbage to hold and let go of.
Exactly. And ultimately, the butterfly is all about transforming, right? She's learning to fly. She's learning to let go of her caterpillar ways. Yes. And so, you know, it's good to be kind of that example, especially with that Jupiter energy. You've got that leadership ability in yourself. You're guiding people through their emotions, but don't hold on to it for yourself.
Right.
Okay. Now, looking at your fingerprints representing your soul imprint. Okay. So I could clearly read, you've got these lovely whorls showing up. If I blow up your hand here, you can see this circular core in the center of what we call your Apollo finger and your little finger also. By the way, whorls only show up on the little finger about a little less than 10% of the time. They're about 25% of fingerprints overall. And I noticed that you had that on both hands. So you've got whorls on both hands on your what we call Apollo and Mercury. And so this is a special, we would look at your purpose. Okay, so this has to do with public impact in the healing arts as your soul's agenda. Okay, so you are here to, Apollo represents like how we show ourselves to the world. So when we have a whorl on this finger, on both, in your case, both fingers, it represents spotlight energy or getting out to more public avenues. So I love the idea about a podcast for you, because that's exactly what your Apollo finger is saying. It's like, stop keeping all of this to yourself. Okay.
Yeah, that's a lot of the messaging that I get.
Yeah. And the fact that you have double whorls on Mercury is representing the healer. So healing arts, healing gifts. And in your case, it's the butterfly, helping people to let go of what they're no longer needing or wanting in their lives, so that they can move on into something new. So basically anybody who comes to you who is blaming their life for X, Y, or Z, right. It's like, well, okay, guess what? There are ways to get over that. And being a beautiful, watery empath that you are, you can do it in a gentle way that can come across as very trusting. Okay. So, and I love your straight fingers, by the way. You've got really, really straight fingers on both of your hands, which, by the way, is not very common.
Oh, okay.
So that is showing that your personal energy, you have done a lot of work up to this point, and I can totally see this. Otherwise, your fingers might be a little more crooked. Okay, because what that represents is a stress showing up on a finger. And I don't see that here. What I see is that you've been putting in a lot of self work.
Oh yeah.
So
for the last several years.
So it's kind of nice to get that confirmation that, hey, guess what? All that work that you're doing is actually showing up in your hands. And it's lovely to see. Okay. So, so also the fact that you actually have five and a half whorls in your fingerprints. So you had some peacocks, and you've also got some loops. There's actually 14 different types of fingerprints that show up in your hands. And you also had a whorl on your left thumb, is what I could see. So going back to this hand over here. So the left thumb represents community and family. Okay, so this is why you want to help not just one or two people, you want to help the collective. And this is actually where your service orientation is coming in. So yeah, your fingerprints are perfectly positioning you for this activity. So it's kind of nice to get that confirmation.
All over everywhere, by the way. My hair's been standing up on end for a while.
Yeah, hands are pretty cool.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. So who are you meant to serve? Okay. So that's one thing that we need to ask. Okay. So you are not meant to serve just anybody, obviously. I would actually recommend that you service your, what I would call your soulmate match, or your best matches, the matches that you have affinity with. Okay. So in this case, being a butterfly, water Jupiter, we would look for your best matches would actually be earthy hands, which would be short fingers and a square palm. And your soulmate match would actually have a strong middle finger. So this combination we call the Empress. Okay, so Empress types tend to be a little bit more on the loner side, and they have a very hard time processing feelings. So that's another good reason why the butterfly does so well with them. Okay, so these are going to be the people who they have a very deep connection to the earth and the planet. And they probably connect better to animals than they do to people, or they connect to plants or trees or, things like that.
Right.
Okay. So those are the people you're going to have a natural affinity for, because that it's the gelling of the archetypes. Okay. So we bring in the water, basically waters the earth. Okay, you nourish the earth element. So we want to find those earthy hands that feel nourished by you. Okay. So I would recommend actually looking for people who are already connected with the earth. Okay, so they're maybe gardeners or planters, or they're the ones who are like planting the trees, like those kind of people. Sure. And maybe they grow their own food and do stuff like that. But they're going to be a natural fit for you to help them to let go of what it is they need to let go of. So that they can do their Empress activities, which is opening up to a more natural way of living. Okay, so a lot of times people get stuck in their lives and they just, don't know how to get out of it, right? Okay, so that's partly what I would suggest, but any earth hand would actually be good for you as well. As far as like, who would you naturally gravitate towards? So people with those short fingers and the square palm. And then after that, I would also suggest that you connect to other water hands, because you also have a natural affinity to people who are like you. So other people with long fingers and a rectangular palm, any water type person, you you would find easy to get along with, and it wouldn't be, you know, difficult for them to listen to you, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it doesn't mean you can't connect to the other types. I'm just saying this is like your very best connection.
Sure. So the earthy is like square palm, short fingers. And what does the Empress look like?
Oh, the Empress is going to have a very dominant middle finger. So the middle finger is actually going to tower above the fingers next to it. So like, for example, if we look at your hand, you see how your Jupiter finger comes up above this upper phalange, like the halfway point in your upper phalange of Saturn. The Empress would not have that. These two fingers, Saturn, would just tower above.
Okay.
Okay. So that's how you can tell an Empress hand.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. By the way, it's not the most common of the archetypes. So certain hand shapes are more common, but it could also be that they just don't get their hands right. And maybe they don't come to me.
Well, you did say that they are more of the loner type, so they probably don't get their hands read very often.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way that it really is. They just don't talk to me.
Good.
But it's all good. So, so let's take a look at, I know you had another question about your hands. You wanted to look at maybe areas that you might struggle, or what might be keeping you from moving forward.
Yeah.
Want to look at that? Okay, well, blockages do show up all over the hands, and there's actually a bunch of different places I can look. So sometimes I just kind of like to look at the hand as a whole, first of all. So like, for example, I was telling you in the finger bends, that can be one place that would represent kind of a chronic block, but I didn't see that with you, so that's good. Your fingerprints also do have lessons in them. And in your case, you've got a lesson of self-worth. So you need to work on building up your feeling good enough energy. Like you need to realize that you've got a lot of experience already, and you have probably brought this forward for lifetimes. So it's time to start owning that. Okay. Another, there's two aspects to this lesson as well. There's also personal power. So you're working on reclaiming your personal power. And that also ties in with passion. And I know this is where you get a little bit tripped up because you have so many passions.
Yes.
Okay. And that's where it's like, oh, well, where do I focus? Okay. So then we want to kind of look around the hand and see if there's any, what I call requirements. Requirements are often will show up in talent markers, and they represent specific requirements that you need to focus on in order to really feel fulfilled. Okay. And well, one that I do, this isn't really a requirement, but you do have a Palmer print called a loop of productivity. So you like to be busy. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's also a common sense marker. Okay. By the way, it's only on about 20% of hands, which tells you how many people actually have common sense.
I really would have guessed way less than that.
So they can come to you for some good common sense, and you can help to put them at ease. I would say that you do have a little bit of a star forming here underneath your Saturn finger. Okay. Stars do not always indicate talents, but in this case, it does. So under your middle finger, this is actually the mark of the networker. Okay. So the networker is something that you need to start doing. This could include collaboration with others. It could also just include, okay, as you start to gather clients, who do I need to connect them to help them with certain pieces of their agenda. This also can tie in with money, and it can represent a way to help other people become financially secure.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting. We call it the Midas touch for others.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's an interesting marker. So it's sort of like, hey, I'll hook you up with somebody that you need to hook up with. And it's also going to have the added benefit of supporting them financially. So just make sure you include yourself in the network. Okay, you're part of the network. So, and that would include supporting yourself and making sure that you're supported along your journey. Okay, because a lot of times, and this can be the case with empaths, they can be very giving. And you're a service-oriented person too in your fingerprints. You actually are in the school of service. So it's very easy for you just to give and give and give and give. I don't want you to do that because then the penalty for this marker is that you'll struggle yourself. Okay, so we don't want that. Okay, so I would say, you know, you need to actually service yourself first. And I get that from your heart line. You've got an earthy heart line. So it's basically saying emotional needs of yourself need to be met first. And then you can fulfill everyone else's emotional needs.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a big deal. Let's see if there's anything else. That's a really big one though. Oh yeah, you got a little star also in your thumb. This is your throat chakra region. Okay, so this is your speaking area. And this is the gifted speaker. So yeah, you need to start speaking. Definitely, that's what I see. And this is interesting too. This one also ties in with money. Okay, so I could see you making a really good living once you actually start speaking up on your own behalf.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, those two markers are pretty clear. So time to get busy. Okay. So a couple of little stress markers that I'm seeing. Okay, and again, these can be blockages, heart chamber blockages, I call them. Your heart chambers representing your emotional stresses. And by the way, these little minor lines in your hand, they are changeable. So you are not stuck with these forever. They are simply reflecting what has been going on in your life. The most recently, you know, so this could be over the last few months or the last few years, depending on how often your hands change. They can actually change quite quickly once you become aware of challenges. And the worst one that I'm seeing really right here is right here in your Apollo. Okay, now this is kind of interesting because it all ties together. Apollo, remember, is the finger of presentation. It's how you're showing yourself to the world. It's also your creativity finger, but it's your spotlight finger. Okay, and this particular section has to do with how you show yourself. And so this little stress is basically saying, I don't know if I really can show myself. Okay. So there's a little bit of a fear there. Okay. And this is common.
By the way, it was bigger at one point.
By the way, this is very common in Jupiterians. Okay, because your Jupiter finger is your strong finger. This is actually how you look at yourself. You're not afraid to look at yourself, but having other people look at you can be, it's not our comfort zone as Jupiterians. Okay, we tend to be more of like a one-on-one kind of a personality, more of a behind the scenes kind of a personality. Even though we're in charge, we don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where we call these dilemmas in the hands. Dilemmas will almost always show up. And so it's basically saying, yeah, I know this is uncomfortable for you, but you're going to be rewarded. We've got all these stars basically indicating the rewards that are like waiting for you. And so my recommendation is to get a little bit out of that comfort zone, because I know you can do this.
Ooh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Indeed.
This is it's just a beautiful confirmation of a lot of things that I already knew, plus some surprises. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. Well, it's definitely my pleasure, and always lovely to connect with other light workers, as I like to call us.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's what I'm seeing in your hands.
Oh. Do you mind if I share just a little bit as far as kind of what, I guess, just to tie it all together? I'm definitely indecisive, and my whole life I've never really known. I've gone from career to career. When I was a little kid, for a really long time, when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I had a vision. I had this vision. I've had it recurring over my whole life, and I never knew how to articulate it as a child. And this is a revelation that I've had probably within the last couple of months, is like this coming back. But as a kid, I didn't understand what I was seeing. And so I would tell people that I wanted to be an international lawyer because I saw myself, I was pretty well dressed, fairly professional, well admired, and on stage, traveling the world, speaking and doing speaking engagements and book signings. Like I've had all of these visions, but none of it ever made sense until, I guess, the last few years has been piecing things together and letting me start to believe that that was even me in the vision. And then hearing that I'm supposed to be speaking and that it's going to be what helps people is beautiful, but also frustrating because of that. Not wanting to know myself, but knowing that that is what I need to do, is just to break out of my comfort zone, do something totally different. And well, if you notice, because since we spoke last week, I have a different background because I'm not at home with my family. I am in the city in an apartment of a friend of mine, taking some time away for myself to really figure out how to make that next move, because I have been so stagnant at home.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy that you got out and it's good, because sometimes you do have to get out of a situation in order to have a different perspective too.
Yeah. So, wow. Yeah. And maybe that was a little bit of an overshare, I guess, for the audience, but
no, it's good. We love that. I'm sure everybody wants to hear, because ultimately when we talk about our own experiences, we are helping people, whether we realize it or not. And this is something that I really learned over the last 12 years of reading hands, is sometimes I don't hear from that person ever again. I do one reading with them. I never talk to them ever again until possibly years later. And a lot of times it's like, well, that reading you did for me really helped. And it's like, oh, good. And, sometimes we don't know how it's going to help them. Maybe there was a little piece that they needed to hear at the time, and then maybe they go back and listen to it again, and then they catch a whole nother piece, so we never really know. And it's good to not be too attached to how are you helping or not helping. The key is that you are in your authentic self and you're doing ultimately what your hands are telling you to do, because your hands are your map.
Yeah.
And so if you're being authentic to your hands, then you can't help but fall into the right experiences and the right life for you that's going to make you happy and fulfilled. And that's really what it's all about. We're not meant to be in fear. We're not meant to live in, doom and gloom and poverty and all of that lack consciousness.
Sure.
We are not meant to be that. We are meant to overcome that.
Yes.
And I think you are actually perfectly positioned to help people come through that. So it's a blessing, and ultimately your service, you just have to think about like service yourself. When you're of service to yourself, you're ultimately going to be of service to others.
Okay.
So
that helps.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you everybody for tuning in. As always, I feel that life has more meaning when it's shared. And that includes sharing with our friends, our acquaintances, and the world together as one, because we are all in this planet on this trajectory of ascension together. So let's get there, okay? And I look forward to connecting with you all again very soon. So remember to live life with love.
Thank you for listening to Love in Your Hands. Please rate, review, and subscribe to show your support. Have a question for Cynthia? Just post a comment. This podcast is sponsored by loveinyourhands.com, the place to find soulmate love fast. Start your free Soul Connection membership today, upload your hand photo, discover your relationship archetype, and start finding soulmate matches. Just go to loveinyourhands.com to get started.